Hello and welcome back to the Indigo mini album tutorial series designed for ScrapNCreate. In this video, we're going to begin constructing the actual album cover itself using chipboard and cardstock. If you've just tuned into this series, there are other videos where we design all of the pages and decorate them. If you have not purchased the Indigo papers yet, they are available at ScrapNCreate.com, and all of the papers used in this project are linked in the description box below. So to get started with our cover, we're going to need 2 pieces of chipboard that measure 8.5 by 9 inches. So 8.5 this way, 9 inches this way. And I like to use heavyweight chipboard so that I have a really sturdy album. We're also going to need 12 by 12 cardstock for this step. So we need 2 pieces that are cut to 10.5 inches by 11 inches. Now I'm going to set 1 piece of cardstock and 1 chipboard cover aside, and we're going to do the first one, and the second one is made the same exact way. So you'll notice that I have lines on my paper. You don't have to do this, but it just makes it easier. So I have a 1-inch line horizontally and a 1-inch line vertically. This is going to help me to place my cardstock on my page so that I have a really good uniform border around my piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add my adhesive to the entire back side of this chipboard. If you are using wet adhesive like I am, make sure that you use a good amount so this entire thing is covered, so that it will stick really well to that paper. We don't want this to lift off at all. Once you have the adhesive on the back, you're going to go ahead and line it up with your lines. If you're not using lines, just try to place this as close as you can into the center of the piece of cardstock so that whenever we go to wrap it, it's pretty uniform. So next, what I'm going to do, I'm going to press over these short ends first. Then I'm going to bring my bone folder in. I like to run my bone folder on the side and then press the top really flat as well. This will give it a really crisp fold so that it's nice and tight against my chipboard. I'm going to open these back up and I'm going to cut these corners. So I'm going to miter my corner, but I'm going to be leaving about 1/8 of an inch past that corner so that it will be fully wrapped when I go to place this over my edge. Now I'm going to take some adhesive and I'm going to apply it to this entire tab section here. And then I'm going to wrap that chipboard. Then I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to do the same thing with the opposite tab. Now that I have both sides wrapped, I'm going to take my bone folder and I'm going to press this paper around these corners. So I'm going to press it down and around. So this is going to allow that tip to be completely covered. Then once I'm finished with that, I'm going to fold these edges over. And then I'm going to add my adhesive here. Repeat on this other tab to finish wrapping the first cover. So now we have our first cover completely wrapped. Now you may have learned how to do a different cover style where the covers and the spine are one continuous piece. If you prefer to do that cover style, you are more than welcome to do that if you choose. This is called the lay flat method, and I'm actually preferring this than the previous way. I used to make my spine and my covers all in one piece, but I really like the way this one actually lays because it does truly lay flat like the name says. So just like with the first cover, I'm just adding my adhesive and applying it to the white cardstock piece to get started. I'm going to go ahead and cut my corners. And then I'm going to fold on two sides to get started. Again, remember you want to burnish this well so that it's really tightly wrapped. You don't want there to be any wrinkles in this so that it doesn't look good whenever you get it finished. Add your adhesive to those tabs. And then now we're going to press down and around on those edges just to cover those corners. Then we're going to fold these ends over. And then we're going to add our adhesive to these tab sections to finish covering the second piece of our chipboard. So now we have both of our covers wrapped with our cardstock. Next, we're going to move on to the spine piece. For the spine piece, we're going to need one piece that measures 5 inches by 10.5, and then we need one piece of chipboard that measures 3 inches by 8.5 inches. Now I did forget to mark 1 inch, so I am going to just put the marks on the paper here instead of draw the line. But just like with the last step with the covers, it can be easier just to have that guideline, so you can go ahead and do that if you choose. Now I'm just adding my adhesive to the entire back section of my spine piece. And I'm going to lay that down in the center of the page. Once I have this on the paper, I'm going to go ahead and roll over the short ends. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold this in the center. I'm going to use my bone folder and press this paper down next to my piece. So it actually will create a slight slant or an angle in my cardstock. So if I press this here down the side, it's going to create that slight angle downward on these little wings. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to place adhesive on this entire section here, with the smaller sections off to the side, as well as the section that will be on the spine piece. So now I'm going to adhere this down flat and then make sure to press up against that chipboard and then press those wings flat. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. I'm going to shape it first and then add my adhesive after I have this piece shaped the way I want to adhere it. So again, I'm going to add adhesive to this entire 1-inch bottom section. And then I'm going to wrap this up over the spine, making sure that it's adhered to the spine, and then wrapping around and flattening out those little tails or wings. Once that's complete, we're going to flip this over to the back side. I'm going to hold on to this with my hand, and very carefully, I'm going to run my bone folder down the length of the chipboard just to create that crease. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So now when I flip this over, the cardstock is actually flat with the chipboard. I'm going to flip my spine piece over now and bring in my cover. I'm going to turn my cover so that the actual cover part is face up. I'm going to use my grid on my desk just to act as a guide for this, but something else that can also be really helpful is if you take a ruler and set your ruler down as a way to line these up as well. So what I'm going to do is add glue to this whole entire tab section. I'm not going to go past the line into the spine piece, so I do want to make sure that I don't put too much glue that it does go up into the spine. But I'm going to add all of my adhesive here. And then I'm going to sit this down on my grid so that it's lined up with one of the lines, and the ruler is down, it's up against the ruler. Doesn't matter which direction you have your cover piece, as long as it's the 8.5 side is the correct way. You're going to set this right next to your cover. No space between the cover and the spine. So when you do the other way, the wrap method, you have to leave a space, but this way you do not have to. So I've got my bottom edges are lined up with my ruler, and these two pieces are flush against each other. Now I'm gonna flip this piece over and burnish this from this inside section. Then I'm going to flip my cover over. I'm going to bring in my second cover, and then I'm going to add the adhesive to this other tab section, and we're going to repeat the same process to put the final cover in place. I'm going to line this up with my ruler, and then I'm going to lay this cover down so that it is flush up against the spine on this side and it is straight with my ruler. Then I'm going to burnish this down. And then I'm going to flip this over. And now I have all of my pieces in one continuous section. So now I have a piece of cardstock. I'm actually just using a piece that was a remnant. I cut it down to 8.25 inches. This is 4 3/4 of an inch. You can cut it to 5, so it's exact here. If you have a piece that's 4 inches, 4.5, that's fine too. But you want to make sure that it's 8.25 inches cut this direction. Now I'm going to adhere this right into the center over my spine. So I want to center this piece, so I've got 1/8 of an inch on the top and the bottom, because this is what my hinge is going to sit on, and it is going to be 8.25. So I'm going to line everything up with this piece. So what I'm going to do is add adhesive to the entire back side of this piece. Make sure that you burnish this down really well so that it is adhered to the entire spine piece and just a little bit on the inside of those covers. And now we're going to let this dry completely before we bend it into the cover, and I'll show you why we didn't need to leave any gaps between these pieces once we do that next step. While the album cover is drying, we're going to work on our hinge pieces. There are going to be 3 of them since this has 6 pages. Now this is a variation of the stack the deck binding, but it's a little bit different. If you don't like this style of binding, you can do any style that you choose, but this is how I prefer to do mine. So this first piece measures 2.5 by 8.25. So I'm going to score this at 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1.5, and 2 inches. My second piece measures 3.5 inches by 8¼ inches. I'm going to score this one at 1/2 inch and 1 inch. And then over here at 2.5 and 3. Now I'm not going to place a score line down the entire page, but I'm going to make a mark at 1.5 and a mark at 2. And if you go down here and you count 1, 2, 3, 4, that's going to be the same. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 there. So you just have little marks because this is going to help us to line up our hinges. The third hinge, it measures 4.5 by 8¼ So on this one, I'm going to score 1.5 or 1/2, 1 inch, 3.5, and 4 inches. Now over here at 3 inches, I'm going to make a mark, and over here at 1.5 inches, I'm going to make a mark. But I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4 from the bottom, and 1, 2, 3, 4 from the bottom. If you don't want to do that, you can always turn your piece over, line it up, and mark it at 3 and 1.5. So now we have all of our hinges done. We're going to start folding these. So I'm going to first start by folding into those folds on all the score lines. Then I'm going to open all of those up and fold in the opposite direction and burnish this direction. This will help the pages to turn easier when they are already worked in both directions. I'm going to do the same thing with the second hinge. And finally with the smallest hinge. Now that I have all of my hinges, I'm going to prepare them for the pages. So I'm just going to be doing this on the outside 1/2 inch flap. So from that score line, the first 1/2 inch score line, I'm going to put my scissors on that score line and I'm going to cut inward to create an angle. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. If you don't feel comfortable cutting into it, flip the paper over and cut it from the back side. So you do that on all 4 of these. So only on these outer 1/2 inch tabs. I'm going to do the same thing on the second hinge. And the same thing on the third hinge. So I'm going to next be cutting pieces for my hinge. I'm going to cover them before I put them in the album. It's actually a lot easier. So I'm going to use this piece of paper here. If you don't have a solid piece this large because you cut your paper differently, find another piece of paper in the collection that has at least 7 inches by 8¼ inches. Now, this is going to take time to do because you're going to be cutting a lot of very small strips of paper. So we're going to be cutting 17 strips that measure 3/8 of an inch by 8 1/4 inches. So this is the size of strip that you're going to need. And these pieces are going to be going in between these score lines. So the score lines are at 1/2 inch, so we're cutting them at 5/8 of an inch, or 3/8 of an inch. I have all of my cuts in order because I'm actually going to place these in order on my hinges so that you will see that continuous pattern. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. I just tend to do it this way. So I'm actually going to start by flipping this small hinge over. Now there are 5 pieces. I'm only going to be putting adhesive in the 1/2 inch middle tab section. Once I have the adhesive on, these 2 marks that we made as our guidelines on the second piece in the flat section, we are going to use these to place our flat part in between there. And then I'm going to adhere this down right to the center. So now when I flip these up and I flip these up, I have 4 of my hinges for my pages. You may be wondering why there are so many pieces. These are extensions so that my pages don't stick up in the air. They will actually bend so that the pages will lay flatter. So these pieces here are like an extension on the hinge. The pieces that are mitered, these are where the hinge is going to go into the page. So now that I have this piece, I'm going to flatten it, and this whole entire section is going to be adhered to the center of that largest hinge. So I'm going to add my adhesive to the entire back section of this middle hinge. And then I'm going to use those guide marks again to place this so that it is equally 1/2 inch from each side. So now I have my hinge with my tabs for all 6 pages. So I'm going to flip my hinge over to the back side just for this first piece. So the first piece is actually going to go on this section here. So I will be taking my first strip of paper, adding my adhesive, and then I'm going to apply this strip right here between these 2 score lines. Then I'm going to flip my hinge back over. I'm going to move all of the hinges out. So I've got my first one, then I'm going to skip this piece. We're not going to put any on the pieces that have that mitered section to it because the hinge is going to go in between the pages in those pocket pages. So we are not going to see that. So there's no reason for putting the paper there. So I'm going to put the next strip on this section of the hinge. The next piece of decorative paper will go right next to that first one, which is why I wanted mine to be continuous, because you will see that. So I've got that next one covered. Then my next piece is going to go on that hinge, or the gusset, I should say, or the page extension. I don't know what you want to call it. This is the actual gusset. This is the page extension. I'm going to place my decorative paper on that piece. Now the next piece here is not going to have paper because that's where page 2 is going to be. So now I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to add my next piece of the decorative paper to this second section here. Since the first section will have the page, it has those mitered corners, it doesn't get any decorative paper. I start there, then I'm going to place pieces here and here. So now I have my 3 pieces. I'm going to skip this. This is where page 3 goes. I'm going to turn over. I'm going to skip this next piece because that again is where page 3 is going to go. I'm going to add my next strip of paper to the second section here. And then I'm going to add to this next one and the one after that. So now I have these 3 pieces. This piece is not going to get one. That's where page 4 goes. Same thing with the first part of this. Page 4 is going to go there. I'm going to start here. So I have the first piece on. I'm adding my second piece, and then I will add one more next to it for this section. Now we have the 3 here. We're going to skip this. This is where page 5 goes. Flipping over, skipping the first section, and then we'll be placing 3 more pieces of the decorative paper here. Now that I have these 3 on, I'm going to skip this. That's where page 6 goes. I'm going to turn over to the back and I'm going to add my final piece to this section here. Now all of my hinge pieces are decorated. So it's really easy to tell exactly where the pages are going to go. I'm just going to fold on these again so that they fold in all directions. And now we've had plenty of time for our album covers to dry. I'm going to take my bone folder, I'm going to run it right down this crease here, just very lightly. And then I'm going to fold up. Then I'm going to, it's easier for me to do it this way, I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to run my bone folder down this fold, or this crease, and then I'm going to fold up. So I mentioned when we were putting this together that we can leave these pieces flush against each other. We don't need to leave a gap because when these come up, the cover is actually the part that is up over the chipboard spine piece. So we don't need to have any extra room in there because there's nothing that's actually flexing the way it does if it's completely wrapped as one piece. So now we have our cover, and it will lay completely flat as soon as we open it. So I'm now going to take my hinge piece and I'm going to set it here in the center of my spine. Now there are 1/2 inch between all of these pages, but there's only going to be 1/4 inch on each of these sides. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to mark this here in the center so I know where to place my pieces. So now when I set this in here, that will be exactly centered in the album. I'm going to take my adhesive and apply it to the entire back piece of my hinge. And then using those guides, I'm going to place my hinge down on this paper. Excuse my head for a moment. Then I'm going to burnish this down. So now my hinges are all in my page. It's ready to go for the pages. But next what we're going to do is decorate the inside of the cover, and then we'll actually place the pages into the album. For the inside front covers, I have 2 pieces of my metallic gold cardstock. They measure 8 1/4 inches by 8 7/8 of an inch. And then I have these 2 pieces from the 12 by 12 papers. They measure 8 inches by 8 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to adhere 1 to the front of each of these gold pieces, and then I'm going to place the hummingbird on the front cover and the dragonfly on the back cover. Now when I adhere this piece to my cover, I want to make sure that it is even on the page. I don't want it to go into this crease here, so I'm going to use that as my end of my page here and place it so there is a nice uniform border of white all the way around that gold. Now with my back cover, I'm going to be doing the same thing, making sure that I use this line here as my line for the end of my page, not going past that, and making sure that there's a uniform border all the way around. So now this is the inside, front, and back covers. I'm going to leave them completely plain. So now it's time to finally place our pages in our album. To do this, we're going to be adding our adhesive on these white sections only. And when you place the pages on these hinges, since the hinge is the same size as the page, it should not go past this score line. If for some reason your hinges are smaller or larger than your pages, this will not work. So you want to make sure it's the right size now. You're going to take your page, you're going to find that pocket and slide it over top the first tab. I'm trying not to get my head in the frame here to do this, so bear with me as I get my page on my tab. All right, so then when you place it down, it will not go any further than this. So you see how my page is the exact same size. It keeps popping up because it doesn't want to go any further. That is what we want, so we're going to have that. If your page doesn't fit, you are going to need to trim your tabs. If they're too small and your page goes down further, you're just going to have to be really careful when you do this next step. So I'm going to be working with wet glue here. If you're using double-sided tape, you just want to make sure that you take tape off of both sides of your hinge to do this. So we've got to be pretty quick when we do this. I'm going to place adhesive on both sides of my tab, then I'm going to place my pocket on my page. Once you have your page on your hinge, you want to press down. Now your page should be perfectly straight in your book. Then I'm going to flip over and make sure that it is right at that score line on that back side of the tab as well. And then I'm going to use my bone folder to press everything down. So now we have our first page in our book. We can go ahead and fold it over. So what you'll notice with this hinge extension piece, when I fold it, it's going to lay flat. The next one will lay flat on top of it. The next page is our half page. I'm going to take all of these tags out of the pocket or the sleeve because I don't want them to get caught in there accidentally. So I'm going to be placing my adhesive on my tab, and then my tab is going to go between the pockets and the sleeve on the front. Again, I'm going to slide that on my hinge until it meets that score line. And then I'm going to press down and it should line up perfectly with your page. Flip over and just check on the back side. Make sure it didn't move at all. And then adhere this down. And then you can bring your tags back in. And place them on your page. So now we have our first half page, and it folds over and it lays flat. We're going to bring in page 3. Going to add glue or adhesive to your tab on both sides. And then apply your page, or apply your pocket over top of the tab to secure the page into your album. Make sure everything is lined up. And then use your bone folder to adhere everything down. Well, this is a pretty thick page because of everything that's in it. So we just want to make sure everything is flush so that pocket does seal onto the hinge. So now we have our third page. Flipping over, you'll see that it lays flat as well. We're going to take page 4. Apply your adhesive and then place the pocket over your hinge to add page 4 into your album. So now we have page 4 in our album. Next, we're going to apply the second half page. So I'm going to take all of these out of my page, so I'm left with just the sleeve and the envelope. I'm going to apply my adhesive on both sides of my tab, and then I'm going to slip that sleeve right over top of the hinge and adhere it into the album. Once my sleeve is adhered to my page, then I can go ahead and add these back into my sleeve here, and I'm going to decide how I want these now that it's in the album. Then I'm going to flip page 5 and bring in page 6, and I'm going to add my adhesive and apply page 6 to the album. So now we have all of our pages in our album. We can go ahead and flip them all. And close our book. So the last thing to do is go ahead and decorate the album cover. So that will be in the next video. If you are just joining the tutorial series, the papers for the Indigo collection are from ScrapNCreate.com. They're all linked in the description box below if you want to join us in the tutorial.